He controlled everything, what I wore, who I saw, even what I thought. But the night he left my suitcase by the door, I realized the truth. If I didn't leave him now, I'd lose myself forever.
I used to believe my marriage was unshakable. Emily and I had been together for almost 10 years, and in those years, we had built what I thought was the kind of life people envied. A nice house, steady jobs, a circle of friends who often called us the perfect couple. I wore that title like a badge of honor. Every time someone complimented us, I felt a quiet pride that maybe, just maybe, I had figured out this complicated thing called love. But looking back now, I realize how blind I was to the cracks forming just beneath the surface. It started small, almost invisible. She began coming home later than usual, brushing it off with a tired smile and an explanation about meetings running long or traffic being worse than expected. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We'd always trusted each other implicitly. But then the excuses grew more frequent. Sorry, I had to stay late. Sorry, I grabbed drinks with coworkers. Sorry, I just needed some air. Every sorry sounded rehearsed, as if she knew the rhythm of my questions before I asked them. One night, I caught the faintest whiff of cologne on her jacket. Not mine, not anything I owned. It was subtle, barely there, but unmistakable. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to laugh it off when I mentioned it. "You must have hugged one of your coworkers goodbye," I joked, testing her reaction. She smiled, too quickly, and replied, "Oh, probably. You know how close everyone in the office is." But the way she avoided my eyes told a different story. From then on, I began noticing things I had once ignored. Her phone was always face down on the table, notifications were silenced, and she seemed to clutch it like a lifeline, even carrying it to the bathroom. I told myself not to be paranoid, but late at night, when she turned away from me in bed and her screen glowed faintly against the wall, I couldn't stop the storm of thoughts. Who was she texting at midnight? Why did she smile at the screen, lips curving in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months? The worst part wasn't the suspicion. It was the doubt it planted in me. I began questioning every memory, every moment. Did she really love me during that weekend getaway? Or was she already thinking of someone else? When she kissed me before work, was it genuine or just a habit she hadn't broken yet? Love, I learned, doesn't erode all at once. It unravels thread by thread until one day you realize you're holding nothing but frayed strings in your hands. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I started watching. I tracked the changes in her routine, the way she seemed distant at dinner, the way she avoided intimacy with vague excuses about being tired or stressed. One Saturday, when she said she was meeting a friend for coffee, I decided to follow her. My heart pounded as I parked across the street from the cafe, waiting. And when she arrived, she wasn't alone. A man was already there, waiting for her. Tall, confident, dressed a little too sharply for casual coffee. She smiled when she saw him, the kind of smile I hadn't been given in months. She leaned in, touched his arm, and for an hour I watched as she laughed, listened, and looked at him with a light in her eyes that used to belong to me. I wanted to storm inside, to drag her out, to demand answers. But I didn't. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, every muscle in my body screaming with betrayal. And yet, I stayed silent because some part of me needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof, undeniable proof, that my world wasn't the illusion I had been clinging to. When she returned home that evening, she kissed my cheek absent-mindedly and said, "Coffee was nice." I stared at her, forcing a smile, pretending I hadn't seen the truth with my own eyes. In that moment, I realized the cruelest part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the lie that comes after, the way they look you in the eye and say everything is fine. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. If she was hiding something, I would uncover it. If she was betraying me, I would know every detail. Because the man who sat in that cafe with her, the man who stole my smile from me, I wasn't going to let him take everything without a fight. I didn't realize how deep his control had sunk into me until I caught myself apologizing for things I hadn't even done. It became second nature. If dinner wasn't exactly how he liked it, I said sorry. If he came home from work in a bad mood, I said sorry. If he forgot to pay a bill, somehow, I still said sorry. And the strangest part was, he never directly asked me to. He never once demanded an apology. He simply created an atmosphere where the only way I could keep the peace, the only way to stop that disappointed look from crossing his face, was to blame myself. You see, Daniel didn't fight. He didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. No, he was far too clever for that. Instead, he mastered the art of silence. If I did something that displeased him, he would just shut down. No angry words, no confrontation, just cold, suffocating silence that wrapped around the house like a fog. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't touch me, wouldn't acknowledge me. And in that silence, I crumbled. I begged him to talk. I begged him to forgive me for whatever mistake I had made. And when he finally spoke again, it was always with that calm, almost saint-like patience. "I'm not angry," he'd say softly. "I just wish you would understand me better." It was brilliant. Cruel, but brilliant. Because how could I be mad at him when he sounded so reasonable? How could I accuse him of anything when he never once shouted or cursed? To anyone else, he would look like the perfect husband. Calm, loving, endlessly patient with his overly emotional wife. I started to believe him. Maybe I really was too sensitive. Maybe I did misunderstand him all the time. Maybe I needed to try harder, be better, love him more the way he needed. And so, bit by bit, I erased myself. The things I used to love doing, painting, reading late into the night, going out for coffee with my best friend, slowly disappeared from my life. Not because Daniel forbid them. No, he never had to. He would just make a passing comment, something small, almost insignificant. "Oh, you're painting again. I thought you'd spend that time with me." Or, "You're reading so late, you'll be too tired to make breakfast tomorrow." And just like that, I'd put down the brush, close the book, cancel the coffee date, because the last thing I wanted was to let him down. The most dangerous manipulation he used, though, was playing the victim. Daniel had a way of making me feel like I was the one with all the power, the one who could hurt him so deeply with the tiniest action. If I laughed too much with a friend, he'd sigh and say, "I wish you'd laugh like that with me." If I forgot to text him back quickly enough, he'd say, "I guess I'm not that important to you." Always soft, always gentle, but each word cut me open and bled me dry. Soon, I was living entirely for him. Every thought I had, every decision I made revolved around keeping him happy, keeping him comfortable, making sure he never had a reason to withdraw that affection he gave me in carefully measured doses. But here's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't last forever. Eventually, something cracks. For me, it was one night, about 3 years into our marriage. We were at a dinner party with friends I hadn't seen in months because Daniel always had an excuse for why we couldn't go. This time, though, we went. And for a brief, shining moment, I felt like myself again. I laughed, I told stories, I drank a little too much wine maybe, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. On the drive home, Daniel didn't say a word. His hands were tight on the steering wheel, his jaw set. My heart pounded in my chest because I knew what was coming. The silence. The punishment. But when we got home, he didn't stay silent. He turned to me with that calm, patient voice and said, "Do you realize how embarrassing you were tonight? You laughed too loud. You interrupted people. You made yourself look foolish. And you made me look foolish for being with you." I stood there, frozen, as he dismantled everything I had felt only hours before. That joy, that freedom, that sense of self, it all crumbled under his words. And then the final twist of the knife. "Do you realize I'm only telling you this because I love you? I want you to be the best version of yourself. But if you don't listen, I don't know how much longer I can keep putting up with this." And just like that, he planted the seed of fear, the fear of losing him. That night, lying in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet snap, like the sound of a thread pulled too tight. I realized I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what I liked, what I wanted, what I believed, because every thought, every choice had been shaped by him. And for the first time, a dangerous question crept into my mind. What if this isn't love? What if this is something entirely else? I couldn't shake the thought. It haunted me like a whisper in the back of my head. What if this isn't love? But every time it came, I tried to bury it. I told myself I was being dramatic, ungrateful. Daniel was good to me, wasn't he? He never hit me, never shouted at me, never cheated. At least, I didn't think he had. He worked hard, paid the bills, kissed me goodnight. People would kill for a husband like him. That's what I kept telling myself. But that whisper wouldn't leave. The strange thing was, once the thought entered my mind, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Tiny details that should have raised red flags, but I had smoothed over in the name of love. Like the way he always phrased things to make it seem like I was the one in control, but somehow the outcome was always what he wanted. "Of course we can do whatever you want, sweetheart," he'd say, smiling. And then somehow by the end of the conversation, I'd be agreeing to his plan. And if I ever protested later, he'd tilt his head and say, "But you chose this, remember? I only went along with what you wanted." Gaslighting at its finest. Or the way he managed to isolate me without ever forbidding me from seeing people. He just made it so uncomfortable, so guilt-ridden that eventually I stopped trying. "Sure, go have coffee with your friend," he'd say with that soft little smile. "I'll just stay here alone. Don't worry about me." And then when I got home, he'd be quiet, subdued. And when I asked what was wrong, he'd shrug. "Nothing. I just missed you." How could I argue with that? How could I accuse him of anything when it sounded so loving? One afternoon, about a week after that dinner party, I decided to go see my best friend Rachel without telling him first. It felt rebellious, almost dangerous, sneaking out like a teenager. We met at a little cafe downtown, and the moment I sat across from her, she frowned. "You look different," she said. "Tired. Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. Nobody asked me that anymore. Nobody really saw me anymore. I forced a smile and said, "I'm fine, just busy." But Rachel didn't buy it. She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. "Busy or something else? You don't laugh like you used to. You don't tell me things anymore. It's like you've disappeared." And that's when it happened. The dam cracked. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I confessed that sometimes I felt like I was walking on eggshells around Daniel, that I didn't know why I always felt guilty, why I was always trying to fix something that wasn't even broken. Rachel listened quietly, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Sweetheart, that's not normal. That's control." The word hit me like a slap. Control. I almost recoiled from it. No, Daniel loved me. He was patient, gentle, supportive. He wasn't controlling, was he? But the whisper in my mind grew louder. What if this isn't love? What if it's something else entirely? When I got home that evening, Daniel was waiting. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't have to. His eyes flicked to my coffee cup, to the faint trace of perfume from Rachel's hug, and I knew he knew. "Did you have fun?" he asked casually. Too casually. "Yes," I said carefully. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good, I'm glad. Sometimes I worry you'd rather spend time with other people than with me. But it's fine. I understand." And there it was again, that quiet blade disguised as love, guilt wrapped in silk. My chest tightened, and before I knew it, I was apologizing. Apologizing for having coffee with a friend, apologizing for leaving him alone for a few hours. That night, lying awake beside him, I realized something terrifying. I had no one left but Rachel.
My parents lived far away, and Daniel had subtly distanced me from them too. My coworkers were just acquaintances. My world had shrunk to a single point, him. And if Rachel gave up on me too, I would have nothing. I started secretly journaling again. Just small notes at first, little reminders to myself of what I was feeling, what I was noticing, because Daniel had made me doubt my own mind so thoroughly that I needed proof. Proof that I was not imagining things. Proof that his words didn't always match his actions. The journal became my lifeline, hidden deep in the back of my closet, written late at night when he was asleep. It was the only place I could be honest. And the more I wrote, the clearer it became. Daniel was not the saint I thought he was. He was a master manipulator. But here's the thing. Once you see with strings, you can't unsee them. Once you realize you're a puppet, you start to dream of cutting yourself free. The problem was, I didn't know how.
I started small. Tiny acts of rebellion, almost invisible on the surface, but monumental to me. Things like not texting him the moment I left work, or not immediately answering his calls, or choosing a TV show I wanted to watch without asking what he felt like. At first, he didn't notice, or maybe he pretended not to. He had this way of playing the long game, letting me believe I was free, only to reel me back in when I least expected it. But then, one evening, after I came home later than usual because I'd stayed to talk with a coworker, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, his phone untouched, dinner cold on the stove. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made my stomach twist. "You're late," he said softly. "I told you I had work," I replied, setting down my bag, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded. "Yes, you said that. But when you say work, I assume you mean work, not socializing." My breath caught. He knew. Of course he knew. He always knew. He cut me off with a gentle laugh. "Relax, sweetheart. I'm not angry. I just wish you'd let me know. I worry, that's all. The world isn't safe, and if something happened to you, I don't know what I'd do." He reached across the table, took my hand, and squeezed it. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a moment of tenderness, but to me, it felt like a leash tightening. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside me. And I realized something. If I wanted to take back control, I couldn't do it halfway. I couldn't keep dipping my toes into rebellion and then retreating at the first sign of pushback. He would always pull me back in, always remind me how fragile my independence was. I needed to be smarter. So I started planning. I didn't know exactly what the end game would be, whether I would leave him or just reclaim enough of myself to breathe again. But I knew I needed a strategy. And strategies were things Daniel respected. If he could play games, so could I. I began observing him the way he observed me, watching his patterns, noting the times of day he was most distracted, the little tells in his voice when he was trying to manipulate me. I wrote everything down in my journal, pages upon pages of small truths, things I had been too blind to see before. And then I tested him. Subtle tests at first. I mentioned Rachel's name more often, just to see his reaction. I deliberately disagreed with him on trivial things like whether the living room needed a new lamp. Each time he tried his usual tactics, soft guilt, quiet disappointment, exaggerated patience, but I started recognizing them for what they were. And when you recognize manipulation, it begins to lose its power. One night, emboldened by my secret journal and the little victories it contained, I pushed further. We were sitting on the couch, the glow of the TV flickering between us, when I said casually, "Rachel invited me to stay with her for the weekend, just to catch up." The room went still. Daniel's hand, resting on the armrest, tightened ever so slightly. His smile didn't falter, but I saw the tension in his jaw. "Oh," he said lightly. "That sounds nice." "Yes, I think it'll be good for me. For us, even. Some space." For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel didn't respond right away. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes scanning my face as though trying to read my thoughts. And then he leaned back, his smile widening. "Of course," he said smoothly. "You should go." I want you to be happy." But beneath his calm words, I felt the air shift. He wasn't going to stop me. Not yet. But he was recalculating, rewriting his strategy. That weekend, at Rachel's, I tasted freedom for the first time in years. We stayed up late, drinking wine, laughing until our sides hurt, and I realized how much of myself I had lost, how much I had silenced my own voice to keep peace with him. Rachel didn't push, didn't interrogate me, but she gave me something Daniel never did: space to exist without judgment. When I returned home Sunday evening, Daniel greeted me with open arms, his smile warm, his embrace lingering. He asked about my weekend, listened attentively, and for a fleeting moment, I almost believed he meant it. But that night, when I went to shower, I noticed something odd. My journal, the one I kept hidden deep in my closet, was slightly out of place, just an inch or two, but enough that I knew he had found it. He had read it. My heart pounded in my chest as I closed the closet door, my hands trembling. I told myself maybe I was imagining it, maybe I had moved it myself, but deep down, I knew better. When I came back into the bedroom, Daniel was sitting on the edge of the bed looking at me with that same calm smile. "How was your shower?" he asked gently. The moment I saw Daniel smile that night, I knew he had read my journal. He didn't need to say it. He didn't need to confront me directly. That was never his style. He preferred shadows over spotlights, whispers over screams. His game wasn't about force. It was about making me question myself until I bent willingly. But this time, I refused to bend. I went about my routine, pretending not to notice, pretending that the journal was untouched, that everything was normal. Yet every move he made that week felt deliberate. Every word he spoke felt sharpened, like designed to cut me in ways only I could feel. On Monday morning, as I poured coffee, he said casually, "I read an interesting article about how journaling can be dangerous in relationships. It makes people overthink, creates distance." He didn't look up at me when he said it, just stirred his coffee with slow precision. My hand froze on the handle of my mug. I forced a smile. "That's interesting," I said, my voice tight. He glanced at me then, his eyes catching mine for a split second. "Yes, but I guess it depends what you write." I nearly dropped the cup. That entire week, I lived in silent paranoia. Every time I left the apartment, I wondered if he was going through my things. Every time I got a message on my phone, I imagined him finding a way to read it. He didn't need to accuse me of anything. He simply let me drown in the knowledge that he knew. But I wasn't completely powerless. At Rachel's, I had tasted freedom. I had felt my voice return. And once you feel that again, you can't just give it up. So I decided to test him. If he wanted a game, I would give him one. I started leaving notes in my journal. Half-truths, misleading breadcrumbs, mentions of secret meetings that never happened, feelings I didn't truly have, doubts about things he hadn't actually done. Each page was a trap, bait for him to take. And he did. It showed in his behavior. If I wrote that I felt lonely, he would suddenly shower me with attention, planning spontaneous dates or cooking dinner. If I scribbled that I thought he was hiding something, he would make a point of leaving his phone out in plain sight, unlocked, as if to prove his innocence. For a while, I felt powerful. I felt like I had flipped the board, forcing him to play my game instead of the other way around. But power is intoxicating and dangerous. One night, I wrote something in the journal I didn't fully think through, something reckless. I wrote that I had been thinking about leaving him, that Rachel had offered me a place to stay permanently, that I was considering it. The next day, everything changed. Daniel woke me with breakfast in bed. He kissed my forehead, told me he had taken the day off work just to spend time with me. He was perfect, attentive, gentle in every way. Too perfect, too smooth. And when I went to the kitchen to wash the dishes, I noticed something chilling. My suitcase, the one I kept in the closet, had been moved to the center of the room, packed. My clothes folded neatly inside, zipped, waiting. I froze, staring at it. My throat went dry. Daniel appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, his arms crossed. "You said you wanted to leave, so I helped you." I couldn't speak. He walked over, placed a hand on the suitcase, and smiled. "Go on. The door is right there."
It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was worse. It was an invitation, a challenge. Because in that moment, I realized the trap wasn't just his control, it was my own fear. He knew I was terrified of leaving, of the unknown, of admitting to everyone that my perfect marriage was a lie. He didn't need to lock me in. He just had to open the door and watch me choose to stay. And I did. That night, I lay awake in bed, my body rigid, my mind racing. I hated him. I hated myself. And I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The game had gone too far. If I didn't end it soon, one of us wouldn't survive it. The night after Daniel left my suitcase out, I barely slept. My mind kept circling the same thought. If I stayed, I was finished. He had proven that he could break me without ever raising his voice. And if I left, maybe I'd lose everything I thought I had, but at least I'd still have myself. The next morning, I went through the motions as if nothing had changed. Made coffee, smiled, kissed his cheek. He played along too, cheerful and affectionate, like the scene with the suitcase had never happened. But his eyes were sharp, watching me, waiting for my move. I knew he expected me to collapse, to beg him for forgiveness, to admit I didn't really want to leave. But for the first time, I felt something stronger than fear. Clarity. That evening, when he left for the gym, I made my move. I grabbed the packed suitcase, still exactly where he had left it, and I walked out the door. My hands shook, my heart pounded, but my feet didn't stop. I went straight to Rachel's, tears streaming down my face before I even rang her bell. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside, held me while I cried, and said, "You're safe now." But safety was temporary. The messages started that night. At first they were calm, almost reasonable. "Come home, we can talk about this." Then they grew sharper. "You can't just walk away after everything we've built." And finally, they turned cruel. "You'll never survive without me. You know that." I blocked his number. He created new ones. I shut down my social media. He found ways to send letters to Rachel's mailbox. Each one was a reminder that even outside his walls, he was still reaching for me. But the difference was this. Now I had witnesses. Rachel saw, my friends saw, and slowly I began to realize that the power Daniel had only existed when it was invisible. Once exposed to the light, his manipulations looked desperate, pathetic. Weeks passed. His messages slowed, his grip loosened. And one morning, I woke up and realized I had gone a full day without thinking of him, without fearing him. It wasn't freedom in the way I had imagined. It wasn't clean, it wasn't sudden. It was messy, painful, full of doubt, but it was real. Sometimes I still hear his voice in my head. I still second-guess myself, still wonder if I'll ever fully erase his fingerprints from my mind. But then I look in the mirror and see a woman who fought her way out of a cage built from silence and guilt. And I remind myself, he didn't let me go. I chose to leave. That's a kind of power he'll never take back.